You know the drill by now. I sat down and watched every single new anime of the fall 2023 season. No sequels, no prequels, and no spin-offs. And we're going to talk about them today. Hopefully to learn what is good, what is frosty, and what I will actually want to spend my time watching this season. So welcome to Glass Reflection. Let's jam. 16-bit sensation, another layer. Let's start by making older fans feel really old. A young illustrator who works in gaming and worships games of the past finds herself somehow transported to the year 1992. Unsure of why or how this happened, she tries to make the best of a weird situation by offering to work at a local game company, considering not only her love for that era's Bishoujo games, but also her skill set as an illustrator. Unfortunately for her, very few of her skills properly transfer over to this era. Since she has spent so much time drawing digitally with a tablet, she's now forced to learn how to do digital art with a mouse. She does her best to get along with her new co-workers, though they don't necessarily believe her story about being from the future, nor really what to do with her and her somewhat overbearingly positive attitude. We've had some time slip shows in the past before, right? And I do find it interesting that the first one that comes to mind is Remake Our Life from 2021, which also deals with a main character who works in games traveling to the past, though in that case it was to change his own life path and better his personal timeline, while here it feels more like a nostalgia fest and a love letter to the era of 90s Bishoujo games. Games like Dokyusei and Canon, though ignoring games like Tokimeki Memorial, probably due to licensing reasons in a broad sense, or Konami just being a dick in a more specific sense. Bingo! So by the end of episode 2, our protagonist finds herself back home, only then to jump back into 1996 for episode 3. And to be honest, we don't really have any idea of where this show is going or what it hopes to achieve, besides just making people long for the era of DOS and the PC-98 and replaying games from it. The fact that they actually use a lot of real games that actually exist only bolsters this assumption of mine. So I'm going to keep this one, as yes, I do actually enjoy the games from this era, and while Konoha, our protagonist, is far more bubbly and upbeat than I would like, given her situation, my interest has been piqued. So let's see where it goes. But on the topic of computers and surfing the waves of time, don't you think it's time for VPN? Today's video is sponsored by our good friends over at Surfshark. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, but Tristan, I've seen this ad before, and that is where you'd be wrong, goober, because this is a double ad. You see, normally, the Surfshark code, Glass Reflection in all caps, would only give you like a middling 3 months of free use for this VPN. But today, thanks to Black Friday, it's not just 3, it's 6. It's double the protection length represented in time. The only thing that's not doubled is how much I got paid. That's still the same. Surfshark is largely a VPN service that allows you to secretly mask your location and activities online as you surf and use the web. But over time, they have branched out and now offer a number of services, including an antivirus and web searching. Just don't tell Alphabet about that. For our purposes, a VPN like Surfshark is best used for connecting to and using streaming services, because not all streaming services work in all regions. So with a VPN, you can connect to a local server of the service you want, and bing bom boom, now you can stream the previously unstreamable. The vast majority of shows that we are talking about today are available on one streaming service or another, but if you don't happen to live in like North America, something like Surfshark would be a great benefit in that regard. Surfshark is available on a variety of devices as well as your PC, so you can stream your anime on the go if you so choose. It will not work on a PC-98. I actually tried. However, it would work on a normal PC or Mac that you then use to emulate a PC-98. Granted, that would be a very roundabout way to access the internet, but it would technically work. Lastly, as mentioned, there will be a link and a promo code in the description where you can sign up for a bunch of extra months free because we like you guys so much. And of course, if you try it and you find that it doesn't help, it's not doing what you expected, or it doesn't end up unblocking the content that you wish it to unblock, Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. So thank you very much to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video. Now let us continue. A girl and her guard dog. Okay, I mean, anyone who has watched this already knows what I'm going to say. right? Before even turning on the first episode, my mind could not forget that anytime a character is referred to as a dog in the show's title, the show itself is usually something that rubs me the wrong way. But on the one hand, I can say that the relationship between the two main characters of this show is a far cry better than pretty much all of those other ones. However, on the other hand, I am still skipping it because I can't get over the fact that what you have is a boy who, fresh out of high school, or perhaps even still in high school, takes care of his boss's granddaughter starting when she was 5. She grows up and now she's going to high school herself, but she has this one-sided crush on the man who has now essentially raised her. She goes to school far away from her family because they're all Yakuza and she wants a normal life. But guess what? This man, who is now 26 years old, joins her high school as a student. I mean, he could be older than some of the teachers there, and how am I supposed to be happy about this relationship between them, right? Oh yes, their interactions seem light and wholesome, but when you have all of this background information backing up the whole relationship, and, his out-of-this-world kind of actions, it really sets me off. I mean, it's not even the age gap, because we've seen some somewhat reasonable romance stories between high schoolers and their teachers before that I've been somewhat okay with, but it's more that this man was essentially her main parental figure for the last 10 years. No, I'm sorry. I can't get past that. So it's just not a for me thing. I'm tossing it. A playthrough of a certain dude's VRMMO life. This one's doing the usual, if you don't want to take the plunge and do a full isekai, you can just go halfway by having the characters play a video game. Our protagonist, with his limited playtime due to life and work, joins a new MMO and decides that he is going to be unique and edgy by selecting all the bad meta options so that people will leave him alone and he can play his multiplayer game solo, which, I mean, I'm not knocking, I can relate to that a lot, actually. Turns out that new game patches come through and his completely off-meta choices suddenly become super overpowered, and he begins his new fantasy life with all of these, essentially, OP abilities. It's not too much different than a typical reincarnation isekai where a god gives the guy cheat skills, but here they try to cover it up by saying, oh, he didn't know that the meta was going to change, it's totally different. No, it's not. It's the same thing, and all I want the show to do is to own that, and I don't feel like it does. There's not a lot here in the intro episodes that make this particular world or characters feel all that unique or memorable, and the main drive has just been this massive change in the game world where our protagonist is now far stronger than originally thought, but that's really not enough for me. I mean, I'm a person who has previously stood behind Bofuri as a good show, and it is more or less identical in premise on paper. But at least with Bofuri, I felt much more attached to the characters and their own personal stories than in this one. Personal taste, perhaps. This is a series that, at the end of the day, has nothing really wrong with it, but I'm not finding much right with it either, so I'm gonna toss it. A returner's magic should be special. While in general I am a big fan of time travel, time manipulation, and time slipping, I do take special interest in stories that revolve around a character using time to give them a second chance, which is entirely what this series is about. A group of powerful adventurers defeat a dark dragon demon lord-like character from another dimension that has been tainting their world for over a decade and slaughtering any adventurers who try to stop it. But shortly after they laid the killing blow and were basking in the peace they saw before them, the dragon's body exploded, taking the entire world with it. Our protagonist then finds himself back at the entrance exam for his school several years before the battles against the dragon even begin, and he remembers all of it, the hardships, the loss, the conflicts, and now his new goal is to make sure that the same mistakes are not made. He seems to retain all of his abilities and know-how from his decade-long war. It's like a new game plus on his life, and he uses that to his advantage to regain entry into the academy and prove his worth to some of his future comrades. Though even with this skill advantage, he still has to contend with the class system of the world and how that, regardless of his strength and powers, the nobles of his society will never agree to have a commoner in a position of power over them. So the story's conflicts seem to be a combination of the upcoming apocalyptic events, political maneuvering, and our protagonist doing his best to reach his true ending. At first, I was thinking about passing on the show because I feel like every season there seems to have some kind of series with adventurers ending some kind of apocalyptic threat, and I had already watched another show this very season with that premise, and we'll get to that. So I wasn't all that keen, but overall, the story intrigued me, and honestly, I put it on my keep list as soon as our protagonist essentially gave the big black dragon the finger and counterspelled his magic in the intro. As a staunch fan of counterspell, any use of it is an immediate green flag in my book. The overpowered nature of the protagonist does bother me to an extent, and I am worried that his past knowledge will be used in a Deus Ex Machina way to advance the plot going forward, but I'm trying to be optimistic with this one, so I'm keeping it in. Berserk of Gluttony. Fantasy world where everyone is judged and divided both by class, but also by whatever skills you receive from the gods when you are born. Our protagonist, who regularly gets bullied by a number of the holy knights of the land, has the gluttony skill, which he, and probably everyone else, just believes to make him more hungry than the average person, and thus is useless. It's not until he kills a thief attempting to escape through the border gate that he learns its true power, which is to steal the stats and skills from anyone or anything he kills. Unfortunately for him, it comes with a massive drawback to match its overpowered nature, and that is once he starts to consume things, he must continue or be driven mad by the gluttony skill and become a danger to those around him. So this story is essentially how he attempts to manage his new hunger of sorts while keeping the holy knights at bay and not giving away his new strength, especially to the one person who has actually treated him well despite his status. What has me intrigued about the whole series is that I can't really perceive the end point just yet. There is no massive threat to the kingdom, so to speak, and actually our protagonist's actions, that is, clearing the area of nearby monsters due to his need to feed, has almost set him up to be the main antagonist of humanity, or it would if the show didn't constantly go out of its way to show how despicable the Holy Knights are, because they're like demeaning people, they're threatening orphans, and overall they just bask in their superior status and making sure that all others know their place. It's very hard to make our protagonist the antagonist after all of that. So for the time being, I'm going to place this one on hold to see where it goes, but I could also see the answers to some questions that I have about it not being all that satisfying, then driving me to watch something with a little bit more substance. Bullbuster. Not gonna lie, when I first saw this show's title, I thought that it was Ballbuster and laughed accordingly. Didn't help that it's being produced by the infamously named Studio Nut, but it has nothing to do with ball busting, and in fact, it has everything to do with mech fighting monsters. See, in this show, there is an abandoned island in Japan that recently had large monsters appear under mysterious circumstances that need to be dealt with. But since the government either can't help or doesn't care enough, the extermination and cleanup of said island is being relegated to private companies who can hopefully do the job instead. Our protagonist is a robot designer with his brand new shiny model that's supposedly capable enough to handle whatever the island can throw at it. But as this is all done for private companies, his robot and him are temporarily hired by a company trying to handle things, and to say that most everything that they handle is done in a slipshod way would be an understatement. There is a scene where, because the company's usual mech pilot had his license expire the literal day before, our protagonist needs to step up and be the hero and go fight monsters, and the music swells and we get that proper mecha setup and everything's raring to go. But then one of the employees comes out screaming and tells us all to stop because the guy hasn't signed any of the forms to be an employee yet, and their insurance won't cover anything that happens. So instead of jumping into battle, we first have to jump into an office and fill out the paperwork. I mean, that's cute. But all of the characters do seem to have some kind of, like, can-do attitude, even though, you know, some of their lives are constantly put in danger to handle monsters larger than most trucks. Overall, the series is kind of like some modern pat labor, but instead of, you know, being the police and helping to fight crime, it's mechanics and blue-collar workers going against rodents of unusual size. While the premise is interesting, the characters haven't yet done much to endear me to them. But I'm not at the point where I'm going to write the whole thing off, because I am curious to see where the whole thing leads. So for the moment, I'm going to place it on hold. Butareba, the story of a man turned into a pig. Okay. So, a reincarnation story, but the protagonist is a pig. However, he is in a situation where there is this young slave girl who can read his thoughts. I say slave because there is a kind of class system in place here. However, it's not really clear why she's essentially left to her own devices despite being a slave girl. There are a couple of hints here and there about her situation, but largely we only know what our protagonist does, which is to say, not a lot. I will say though, the entertainment from this series for me has just been like just the plain absurdity of the whole thing. You got this horny guy who is now a literal pig who keeps thinking a bunch of degenerate thoughts like he would, and then you have this girl who can read his mind and is perfectly okay with all of that. Now, according to a couple of synopses that I've read, this lady apparently does plan on eating him because he's a pig, so I'm curious how that's going to work out and you know what will happen down the line. So for the sake of my own morbid curiosity, let's say, I'm putting this one on hold, but I'm not all that optimistic on the chances of me finishing this one compared to other shows that I am holding. Firefighter Daigo, Rescuer in Orange. No real comments on this one, to be honest. Do you want a seemingly realistic series about a group of firefighters and their grueling training in order to be the best so that they can rescue people from dangerous situations? Then perfect. This show is for you. If you don't want that, or like me, are just kind of meh to the whole idea, then this is less than perfect. I actually hate talking about shows like this because it's not like I dislike the series. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not to my taste, and I feel like to say that I'm not watching it might deprive someone of their favorite show by, you know, not outwardly recommending it. But I'm also not comfortable recommending a series that I'm not personally gonna watch all the way through. So it's not a bad series, but it's just not for me. So I'm tossing it. Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. At the time of writing, I have watched every single episode of this show, which is more than most because it started with 4 episodes coming out of the gate. And my opinion is thus. It's great. No notes. I'm gonna be watching it, and it's probably my best of season. Moving on. I Shall Survive Using Potions. A cheat skill isekai where the protagonist is sent to another world by a ditzy goddess after being accidentally sawed in half by a different god. But because, you know, our protagonist has read these kinds of stories before, she keeps bargaining for skills and eventually gets what she wants, specifically the ability to create any potion that she desires, not fully realizing at the time that the world she is heading to doesn't have potions, and for some reason the aforementioned ditzy goddess didn't tell her or realize the implications of this. Because now, her magical elixirs of miracles are kind of the most OP stuff that this world has ever seen. If I was to watch this series further, spoilers, it would be something that I would have on like in the background. Like other things on this list, I don't feel like on its own the series is bad, but there's not a lot here that makes it good for me, and the overpowered nature of the protagonist doesn't really help me empathize with her story at all. Beyond the potions even, she's also started giving advice to this world's citizens and charging for it, including members of nobility and other citizens of great import. And that advice that she gives is 1000% exactly what they needed to hear in that moment. And you know, just there are limits to how much of a wonder child the protagonist can get before I feel like the wind of the sails just kind of die off for me. So I'm tossing this one. I'm giving the disgraced noble lady I rescued a crash course in naughtiness. This show's main gimmick is that it distorts your expectations by using gutter-minded dialogue to try and imply one thing, but then stone cold does something completely different. Like if someone told an adult woman that they were about to give her a crash course in naughtiness, what you are implying would be very different than if you were a 5-year-old telling a similarly aged 5-year-old girl the exact same thing. Adults would mentally go to the bedroom, kids would go to the cookie jar. Because that's what being naughty to a 5-year-old is, doing things that you are traditionally not supposed to do. This series uses adult-looking characters, but is entirely going for the cookie jar with its implication of naughtiness. So much of this series is just pure fluff in a positive way, and how our main characters interact is the kind of glue that holds the whole thing together. I'm still skipping the show beyond this point because it's not really my thing, but hey, it probably does have one of the best cat girls for the season, so there is that, I suppose. I'm in love with the Villainess. I had this show pretty low on my priority list for watching out of everything because, you know, I've kind of been checked out of the whole Villainess and Otome parody shows for a while now. But this surprisingly, against all odds, has won me over. So our protagonist gets sucked into her favorite Otome game as the protagonist, but she has a major quirk in that one of the reasons why this particular game is her favorite is because she has fallen in love not with any of the male characters, but with the female Villainess. Because of this, using her new lease on life, she decides to take advantage of the situation. So when the Villainess begins her bullying of the protagonist, she loves every second of it. She gets pushed over. Oh, thank you, Miss Claire. Gets water dumped on her. Oh, Miss Claire got me wet. Gets her foot stepped on by accident. Step on me harder, Miss Claire. As you might imagine, this kind of takes the villainous Claire off guard, and it's a relentless assault on her character and her actions. Our protagonist uses her knowledge of the game to nudge events in directions that she wants, but is only delayed by the fact that this is an Otome game, and that normally assumes that she would want one of the male leads and not the primary antagonist. So she starts to have to, fend off the male characters while also getting as close to Claire as possible by becoming her maid, using blackmail material against her family that only a player of the game would know. She is slowly but surely melting the Ice Queen tsundere that is the villainous Claire, and I am here for it. Keeping this one. KamiErabi God.app. Hey mom, can we have Mirai Nikki? No, we have Mirai Nikki at home. This is the Mirai Nikki at home. Actually, I feel like that's almost an insult to Mirai Nikki, especially since everyone and their dog is making that comparison. Oh, I am so original. So the obvious thing to criticize here, beyond that reference, would be the show's animation. Not only does the CGI feel unrefined and, well, stiff in general, but even the facial expressions of the characters seem off, and it makes it really hard for me to care about any of them because of this. It's odd though, because there are the very occasional moments of great movement and pacing with the animation. And like, if the whole show were like that, it would be superb. But it's just not, and the high highs do not make up for the really low lows. Apparently, Yoko Taro is credited as the creator of this series, and from the story, I do sort of see his influence, but it's also quite a bit off from his other work, at least the work that I'm familiar with, so I'm hesitant to dump the entire creative credit onto him. Being only listed as a creator does make me question his actual involvement, right? Because I am wondering if this is just a situation of he wrote a general outline and then just left the rest of it for other people to take up and run with. I mean, there are other big names attached to this project as well. Okubo of Soul Eater and Fire Force fame is responsible for the character designs, which is odd, both because he's been on record as ending his manga career with Fire Force, and also because the CGI characters don't really look like anything he's ever done before, which again makes me question his involvement. There's just a lot of stuff here with this series that makes me feel like someone, or perhaps many someones, dropped the ball on what was otherwise a promising series. Mostly because, for all of its faults, I legitimately do feel like watching more of it. Though, in all honesty, it's more like that same feeling you get for wanting to watch a trash fire. So it's not really a glowing recommendation. Overall, this series about a character getting powers from some kind of fairy-like demon and then unknowingly agreeing to enter a battle royale could be interesting and get better, but I'm not all that optimistic about it personally, so I I'm skipping it. KAWAGOE Boys Sing. This is another one of those shows that really has nothing wrong with it. Grandson of an academy principal is tasked with not only starting a boys' choir, but winning a tournament with said choir, otherwise he won't get a recommendation from his grandmother to continue his actual profession as an orchestra conductor. Some of the boys that he recruits unwillingly are talented, but also have anxiety problems or other issues that the show will no doubt work through over the course of its length. And in the end, while it's presented as a series about a choir group, since there is also dancing involved, it's actually a boy idol show in a very poor disguise. Nothing wrong with this genre of narrative or this show in particular, but it's just not my thing. I'm not a fan of boy idols or idols in general, so I'm tossing it. MF Ghost. The spiritual successor to the super famous 90s racing anime and manga Initial D. Or rather, it's less of a spiritual successor, considering that Fujiwara is not only mentioned, but his famous AE86 sprinter Truno gets a flashback scene, making this series, MF Ghost, a full-blown sequel with a new cast. Protagonist Kanata just moved to Japan from England in search of his father, and determines that the best way to get his missing father's attention and have him come out of the woodwork is to do super well in the extremely popular racing sport called MFG. Through family connections, he gets a mechanic and a hero car for his adventure, a Toyota 86, and like Fujiwara before him, blazes a trail that sees him on the road to victory despite having an underpowered car compared to his competitors. You know, like an Initial D. If you liked Initial D, you will probably love MF Ghost because it is essentially the same show. Just, 30 years later with a bunch of polish and brand new cars, the sort of thing you would expect. There's enough nostalgia bait here for old fans to enjoy and get a little bit of a dopamine hit from, while also not being so reliant on Initial D that it would scare off newcomers looking for an entertaining series about racing, even if there is another racing series that is also out this season that we'll get to. Overall, this is one of my favorites so far, but I am biased considering my own love for Initial D as a franchise. I mean, I even carry around one of the licenses from the Japanese arcade Initial D machines. Worth every dollar I spent on it, too. Glad I have it. So I'm keeping MF Ghost for more drift racing madness. Migi Dali. Hell, you want to know how to turn me off a series immediately? Start playing Claire de Lune from the word Go. I hate that song with a burning passion, and yes, I get that it's a classical song that anybody can use without having to pay licensing fees, but I just hate it. But okay, let's talk about the show proper. Creepy is a good way to describe this series. It's from the creator of Haven't You Heard? I'm Sakamoto. And it takes the absurdist humor the former series was known for and applies it, well, it's like it applies it to the twins from The Shining or something. Our dual protagonists have maneuvered themselves into being adopted by an elderly couple, except as far as the couple is concerned, they only adopted a single child. They don't know that the boys are continually swapping with one another so as to only appear as one person. The reasoning for this is unclear. The boys want to investigate something about the local town, perhaps in relation to their former family, but like Sakamoto before it, most of the series so far has gotten tied up in a multitude of absurdist situations. Situations occurring from misunderstandings of harmless situations that the boys assume to be far more sinister in nature. It's this odd mix of dark and horror theming tied to the absurdist comedy of the actual results that I really do feel like is an acquired taste. A taste I don't personally have, so I'm tossing it. My daughter has left the nest and returned an S-rank adventurer. I've been following this series in light novel format, so I may be kind of biased towards it because I really do enjoy the original material. Even though, if I am being honest, there's not much special about either the narrative or the adaptation. I'm just perhaps starved for fantasies that have nothing to do with some isekai protagonist or overpowered skills. Not to say that the protagonist, Anji, isn't strong. She is. She's an S rank, but I feel like the narrative treats her very differently than all of those, OP protagonists. While a lot of the fights are indeed a cakewalk for her, they are presented in a way that just shows that they're supposed to be a cakewalk. She's just thrown into them because her Adventurers Guild has very little in the way of skilled members, so she gets the job by default. It also keeps her from being able to go home and visit her father, something she absolutely hates. Her strength is not presented in a way that makes the viewer, like, envious of her abilities or, like, wishes that we were in her shoes, for lack of a better description, which is why I've been enjoying it. The story beyond that is fairly basic, though, with Anji just trying to get time off to go see her dad, and, you know, some sprinkling of ominous foreshadowing largely buried under comic-like antics from both Anji and other characters that interact with the world and her father. I am going to end up keeping this one, but again, I am kind of biased towards it due to reading the original material, and I realize that most probably won't care about it. But that's okay with me. Quickly though, let's take a break for a moment. Give me a chance to collect myself before we continue on with the next section, because I wanted to give out shoutouts to supporters of this channel over on Patreon. While this video is indeed sponsored, the more support that we get over on Patreon, the less sponsors that Glass Reflection will need at any given time. So an immense thank you especially to patrons like Omar Showman, Sailor Arashi, Hector Montemayor, Siri Yamako, Ryfen Bonaparte, and Ross Emerson. We can't continue this without your support, so however much you are able to help, I am eternally grateful. My new boss is Goofy. Our protagonist left his old desk job due to abuse, and now has to wrangle through a kind of PTSD in his new job, desperately praying that his new boss is better, only to find out that his boss is a complete oddball, and as the title of the show suggests, a goofy. Despite being labeled as only a comedy, some of the romantic undertones are far more overt at times. It's cute from that perspective, and I am glad to see that our protagonist is seemingly living a much better life at his new job, and I hope that throughout the series he slowly comes out of his shell a little bit more and recovers so he doesn't have like panic attacks at work. But I mean, his current job is being presented as like the perfect workplace with a bunch of lighthearted odd jobs as his fellow employees, so that's not looking like it's going to be much of a problem. Despite these hopes, I don't feel like this is a series that I'm personally going to be continuing with. Like others, it's not that the series is bad, but because it's just not for me, and that's okay. It may be great for someone, it may even be great for you. Maybe. Our dating story. Experienced you and the inexperienced me. You are either going to really like this one or probably be indifferent, and I'm not sure where I stand yet. Romance anime involving two characters who, as the title suggests, have very different experience levels in relationships with the opposite sex. The girl having many and the boy having none. What I really do like about this series is how both levels of experience are treated as normal. Our male protagonist, Ryuto, does not seem to mind that his crush, Runa, has had multiple partners before, nor that she basically offered to sleep with him on their first date because she honestly expected that's what he wanted based on her own past experiences. Likewise, Runa seems to find Ryuto's innocence extremely charming and enjoys spending time with him. So this will either end up being a series that I end up watching all the way through, or something that I will drop due to lack of interest. But since that hasn't happened yet, I am going to play it safe and just place this one on hold. Overtake. If MF Ghost wasn't enough race-driving drama for you, then Overtake will be more than enough. But instead of street racing cars or supercars, Overtake exists within the world of F4 racing. Not F1 or 2 or 3, F4. Please join me in the club of people that didn't even really pay attention that this existed. It follows a rookie team of driver, mechanic, and photographer as they attempt to improve at the sport and make their way to the winner's podium. While racing is obviously a big part of this show, the focus is actually placed far more on the characters themselves and the various problems with their lives and their past that they need to come to terms with and get over. And it's not just the protagonists either that have a variety of different problems, but there are plenty of times so far that we get to spend moments with like other F4 teams and the various struggles that they face, which gives us good variety, but the emotional and somewhat mental struggles of the main group are on full display and are shown quite brilliantly. Like most sports shows, though, if you have literally zero interest in racing, I don't know if there's going to be much here to keep you interested. But hopefully the characters, Haruka specifically, will be enough to keep you, as it will me, watching. Paradox Live, the animation. Anytime a series starts off with the animation, I almost instantly get defensive because usually it means it's some kind of mixed media project where the anime is like just a lesser part of a greater whole. And lo and behold, this is in fact a mixed media project that I have really no knowledge of. As such, as much as I know I'm not the audience for this, I am soldiering on regardless. So, Paradox Live is a story about a group of hip-hop groups that come together at a venue with mysterious history to compete in rap battles for not only an insane amount of money, but also the chance to face off against a legendary hip-hop group that disappeared years ago, but who were so influential to the scene that the majority of singers currently involved started their careers because of them. There's also this thing about a liquid substance called phantometal that creates chemical reactions from emotions of the singers on stage, and it essentially just makes like really cool effects happen during their shows or something, though there are apparently side effects of using it. They'll probably get to that. Overall, the entire mixed media project has been around since 2020 with several albums and VO dramas, none of which have official English releases. Surprise. But there is a fandom site for it that is surprisingly detailed. So I'm not sure who the audience for this is. I will say that this is where I personally check out, as if you haven't noticed, I'm not the biggest fan of any anime that's focused on musical groups, with very few exceptions. And while I have nothing against the series, I have nothing for it either. A toss. Protocol Rain. An esports anime with, I'm not even going to try and sugarcoat it, this as the game they are using. I mean, I suppose it's nice that they are actually using like an in-game world for those scenes, but it's just not great. Anyways, protagonist here seems to be in deep with video game addiction. He had to go cold turkey after a car accident that killed his father and left his sister paralyzed from the waist down, as he needed to step up and help his family since his father was the breadwinner. He gets a job at an esports cafe run by an old friend from his gaming days, and the cafe itself, despite previously hosting a professional esports team, is now in massive debt. The former teammates quit, fearing that they won't be paid even if they did start winning, and the owner, out of necessity, now forces his daughter to hell. So between her, our protagonist, and a mutual friend who hangs around the cafe a lot, they start their own esports team and look for members. The story on its own is unique, I suppose. At first I thought that part of the reason our protagonist was looking at games like he had PTSD was because gaming somehow caused the family incident, but no, it's just him reflecting on his own actions and trying to better himself for his mom and his little sister, which, good for him. Not sure why everyone is then suddenly okay with him getting back into esports though, especially when he does need to support his family, and any winnings that their team makes will mostly just be used to pay off the cafe's debts that he really doesn't have any obligation to help with, but you know, this drama is probably what will end up making the whole thing interesting. Oh, and he has another gamer friend from his past who probably is in love with him and is super happy that he's gaming again. But since she's an idol or some other kind of media personality, she can't outwardly join their team, but well, you know, things happen and episode 2 ends with the show pulling a Rei Ayanami. Because fan service. Overall, it's an odd show, and I really do want to see where the hell this is going, but it's not like I'm in love with it, so for now I'm putting it on hold. Ragna Crimson. Fantasy world that has been ravaged by dragons. Our protagonist, Ragna, will one day exterminate them all, but it'll take his entire life to accomplish this, and by the time that he does, there will be no one left that needs protecting. So with the help of an entity called Crimson, he sends all of his abilities and skills to his past self, so that the extermination can happen far sooner and in earnest, so that he's able to protect those he loves. It's based off a manga series that's been in print since 2017, and honestly that worries me, because said series is still ongoing. It's got 12 volumes currently published, and even with 24 episodes scheduled with this adaptation, there's no way in heck that things are getting wrapped up with just that. I mean, even the manga ain't wrapped up, so like, here's the issue I have with these situations. Do I watch the anime, get interested in where it's going, invest in the world and characters, only for the adaptation to drop off, and me just be left hanging unless, you know, I suck it up and buy all of the manga, which I hate doing. On its own merits, purely just based on the anime, I would say that I would be keeping this series. But a part of me doesn't want to go down that road, only to feel the same loss and emptiness about it that so many other shows have left me feeling over the years. I will keep it as my rating, but whether or not I end up actually watching it will probably depend on how much I want to hate myself by the end of next season, when this whole thing wraps up. Ron Kamonohashi's Forbidden Delusions. I could, and was thinking at one point, that I would probably toss this series under the bus for being an uninspired Sherlock Holmes wannabe series, considering the deduction abilities of one of our protagonists. But actually watching this series has left me actually kind of happy with how the show is going. Detective Totomaru, a low-ranked member of the 1st Detective Division, is in trouble with his career. He makes mistakes, massive mistakes that 3 times previous allowed culprits to escape, and his superiors are none too pleased. But an older member of his division gives him the suggestion to seek out a former detective for advice on a current serial murder case, saying that said detective might be able to salvage his reputation. That former detective is Ron, formerly the greatest detective that ever lived. Apparently. He's a current recluse who has secluded himself from the world and society so that he doesn't act on his impulses to try and solve mysteries. Totomaru is able to coax him out of his padded apartment by feeding into his detective addiction without realizing that there is a reason for his current situation. Turns out Ron, while being extremely formidable, has a bit of a mysterious ability. When he confronts killers, he unknowingly and unwittingly is able to magically convince them to unalive themselves. His eyes glow in a very Code Geass kind of way, and then the culprits usually try to take the easiest way to their demise. This is a problem, of course, because the culprits are supposed to be taken in and, go through the legal system properly, not be killed. Hence Ron's previous seclusion, as he has no way to stop this compulsion of his. Thankfully, Totomaru, while not being the greatest detective in his own right, has quick reflexes and is able to save the culprits from their demise and arrest them properly. A perfect counterbalance to Ron's abilities. This magic eye thing is what is making the series interesting for me. I'm generally starting to dislike the types of detective stories where the protagonist can just figure everything out with a look and magically the case is solved. As long as they at least make it difficult for them to prove anything, then that's probably a little bit better. But the character dynamics here are really what's keeping me involved, and the mystery behind Ron's power, as well as the training from a detective academy that seems to not be all that happy that he's doing detective work again since they've banned him from doing so somehow. All of that has just been immensely entertaining, and thus I'm keeping it. And hopefully I don't regret that decision. Shangri-La Frontier. God, how long has it been since I've given a crap about a series involving people playing an MMO? Bofuri? Usually I'm of the mind that if you're going to put people in a fantasy world with a bunch of gaming tropes, you might as well just bite the bullet and make it a straight fantasy. But for narratives that rely on a game for its setting, well, that's not really doable. Shangri-La Frontier features a protagonist that has a reputation for hunting down and clearing extremely trash games. Games that are not just difficult, but broken, poorly designed, and badly executed. After his latest foray into a VR game ends in victory, his local game shop owner recommends that he play a good game for once. One that should make him both appreciate gaming and work as a comparison for future bad games. That game is Shangri-La Frontier. The narrative is actually pretty common from this point. He's a solo player that ends up picking off-meta choices due to his own personal tastes, and it's his tenacity as a gamer that allows him to defeat challenges much higher than he really should. So now he's a naked player with a glass cannon build that wears a bird mask. Because reasons. There is this subplot involving a girl in real life who is crushing on him hard, and, she's been a player of this game for a while, so she's trying to meet up with him in-game and take on a mentor role with him since he's a newbie. But since his choices are so off from the norm, she can't seem to get a beat on where he is, and it's not like she's so outgoing enough to ask him in real life if they want to meet up in-game, so she's just doing her best to find him, and it's just not working out for her. The action of the series has been impactful, and the drive of our protagonist is something to behold. Like, the selling point for me is that even though his choices and his player skills make him formidable, he is not so overpowered that nothing is a challenge. In fact, he has already died several times in just the first 3 episodes. So that's a major plus compared to like other MMO shows that are trying the same thing but just have their protagonists be all powerful. Perhaps things will taper off as the series progresses and, all of the female characters from the opening come into play, making the series a mini harem or something. But for now, I'm keeping it. Shy. So we have a modern world that has a small group of humans chosen in some way to receive magical bracelets and a snake-like companions, and then become heroes. There is only about 1 hero per major country in this world, and our story is about Japan's hero, Shy. As her name suggests, she is very introverted and anxious about life and her abilities. But as a hero, she does her best not to let that slow her down as she attempts to complete her hero duties. We've seen a number of seemingly normal threats that Shy gets to deal with, from burning buildings to a broken down amusement park ride. But eventually we start to see things a little bit more sinister in nature occur. After all, since heroes exist in this world through some kind of magic or technology that's never going to be fully explained, it stands to reason that there are equal powers working against humanity. And one of these powers targets Shy's new friend, feeding on her insecurities and making her turn into a monster. I really do like Shy as a character. If for nothing else, I find myself relating to her heavily, with all of her introverted natures. But there's something about the world here that I'm just not fully sold on. A lot of the stuff about why and the how of these heroes is glossed over and not really mentioned at all, and I feel like I would have preferred a little less hand-waving in that regard. Yeah, it's easier to just say, heroes exist, deal with it, that's just how things are, but I really did want to know why only these heroes or these heroes specifically, and where does their power come from and things like that, because I'm just so curious. And with all that in mind, I'm going to put it on hold, but I can see myself dropping it over the next few episodes if they don't really have anything more for me to latch on to. Shy is a great character, but I don't think that's enough at this moment. Hopefully I enjoy future episodes as they come out. Stardust Telepath. Moving into another series with a heavily anxious protagonist, but this time, instead of being a superhero, she's just a normal girl with a weird fascination to one day meet an alien, only to be surprised when she meets a new classmate who actually claims to be one. Stardust Telepath is a very light series. It's listed as both a comedy and a slice of life, but I find that it leans far more into the latter rather than the former. But comedy has always been a matter of taste. Our protagonist keeps trying to deepen her friendship with her new alien friend, but is battling her anxious tendencies to do so, and said alien is just so overly upbeat and bubbly that they make a good pairing. The best recommendation that I have for this series is that it's a good one to use as like a palate cleanser throughout the season, as there's no real stakes, there's no heart-stopping romance, I think, just a couple of high school girls doing weird and quirky things. Since one of the girls claims that she's an alien and she wants to go home to space, but doesn't know how. So I'm giving it a hold rating because I largely just, need to be in the right mood for this sort of show, even if slice of life is like one of my favorite genres. The show is good, and it is worth checking out to see if it is to your taste. Tearmoon Empire. I was lucky enough to actually read some of the novel for this when it was up on J-Novel, so I was pleasantly surprised by its adaptation. In short, Tearmoon Empire is like if one of the more traditional Villainess Otome game narratives just ripped out the Otome game aspects entirely, and instead of having someone, know the whole story because they played it, our protagonist instead knows the story because she lived it. Which, as someone who just said only a couple of sections ago that I would very much like most game-setting narratives to just be a straight fantasy, seeing said straight fantasy is just freaking great to me. Princess Mia of the Tearmoon Empire grew up a spoiled brat, became a fantasy version of Marie Antoinette, and for her troubles, she was locked away in a cell for 3 years before being unceremoniously executed in front of all of her citizens that were clamoring for her head. Cut to her reincarnation as herself, but 8-ish years prior, back when she was still a young princess and the kingdom had yet to fall into various pits of despair due to her lack of interest in its management and stubborn anger towards keeping her luxurious lifestyle while people died of hunger. Fearing the guillotine and armed with her diary that magically keeps updating with her soon-to-be fate, Back to the Future style, Mia sets out to use her loose knowledge of future events and those within her employ to save the kingdom from its terrible fate and herself from losing her head. It is a villainous story, one that we have seen before, but for me, just the complete removal of all that gaming meta-knowledge just makes the series far more enjoyable for me. So this one is going to be a solid keep, as I really do want to see how Mia gets on. She'll succeed, of course, as is the way of the protagonist, but as we've not yet been shown exactly who might have been pulling the strings of rebellion in her past, how she tries to handle new developments should be interesting. The 100 girlfriends that really, 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 really love you. Harem! Begone, foul wench, from my personal computer! Okay, maybe that's not entirely fair, but I'll be honest, this has all of the markings of a series that I just don't enjoy, and while there have been moments that actually impressed me, the overall plot has me just feeling tired. Our protagonist has horrible luck and gets rejected from 100 relationships before high school. But due to a clerical error by God, he is now set up to not only meet his destined soulmate, but he now actually has 100 destined soulmates who will instantly fall in love with him as soon as they both lock eyes for the first time. I mean, we've seen how harems work with only like 5 or 6 girls. Why do we suddenly think that 100 of them is a good idea? Yeah, only like 6 of them make appearances in the opening, so there's probably going to be a limit on how many the show actually introduce. But really, the show is going to have to spend its entire runtime trying to justify why any of these girls are suddenly okay with sharing their one and only guy with 99 other girls. A situation that I think is personally unjustifiable. I mean, in theory, I'm sure polygyny works for some people, and generally if it did work, I doubt many people in those relationships would feel the need to advertise it constantly. But even with a poly relationship, there has to be an upper limit on what these girls should accept, and also what this one man can physically support. Like, what is he gonna do? Split up his year and give each girl only a few days each to themselves? That sounds like a great relationship. Oh yeah, you guys are soulmates, but you know, he has 99 other soulmates, so you only get like 3-ish days with him all to yourself. And the rest of the year, he's off tending to the emotional needs of 99 other women. I'm sure others won't care and might actually end up enjoying all of these moments that, you know, there were a few that did impress me. But since I just don't want to deal with the rest of the narrative, I'm giving it a toss. Sue me. The Apothecary Diaries. A young girl, daughter to an apothecary from the Pleasure District, gets kidnapped and sold to the courtesans section of the Imperial Palace, in a kind of fantasy Chinese Empire analogy. The Emperor doesn't have a wife, and the rear palace contains all of the various concubines that will bear his children, since as Emperor, one of his duties is to have as many children as possible. Our protagonist, Mao Mao, is not sold to the palace to become a concubine or anything. She's just a serving girl. But she is an apothecary by trade and ends up sticking her nose in situations that she might have been better off leaving well enough alone. Starting off by writing a note to one of the head concubines that, hey, the reason why your baby is sick is because someone around them is using makeup with lead in it. And that's a poison. Because of this note she sends, she grabs the attention of one of the major players in the rear palace, a eunuch who sees potential in this girl, even though she has a weird habit of poisoning herself for kicks. And he wants to use her talents to essentially try and solve a bunch of mysteries within the rear palace. And she becomes a detective of sorts for him, though unwillingly. This is another series that I have been reading the original material before, and honestly, I am far preferring this adaptation, and as such, I do pray that it continues for many seasons to come. Not only is how Mao Mao drawn far more entertaining to witness than just, reading her internal thoughts, but the visual aspects of this adaptation help when, the author doesn't abide by any good naming schemes, and there are several regularly used characters with similarly spelled names, and that gets confusing. Like, there are 4 major concubines in the rear palace, 3 of which have names that begin with the letter L, and 2 of which start with L-I. So until you memorize who is who, it makes it very confusing to read, let me be honest. With all of the great aspects of this adaptation combined, I'm gonna be honest, it's gonna be real tough for me to choose a best of season between this and Frieren. But that's a good problem to have, really. Keeping this one, obviously. The Kingdoms of Ruin. When the gods once created this world and the humans who lived on it, they also created a group of beings called witches. Witches who could use their magic to maintain the world and bring peace to all who lived on it. But eventually, the humans grew fearful and jealous of the witches' magic and sought to Order 66 all of them, nearly succeeding in that slaughter, save for a few holdouts. Our protagonist is the apprentice of Witch Chloe, who was executed by the human emperor for the heinous crime of being a witch. He himself was then imprisoned, and 10 years later, given the chance to escape, vowing to bring vengeance to all of those who wronged him and his master. I am really enjoying this one, actually. It's got an interesting story that it wants to tell. There's a good amount of world building here that's very intriguing and mysterious without either being so mysterious that you can't get comfortable with it, nor being such an open book that there's no mystery left. I do have some theories as to what is going on and where things are going, because not only are the humans shown as despicable idiots who are killing all of the witches and things are going to go terribly wrong for them because of that, the witches don't seem to be all that great either when we meet them. So where our protagonist ends up going and what he ends up doing, well, now that is going to be worth watching, I think. I do feel like we are going to need a few more curtains to raise, with information to truly see where the narrative is going, but for now, I'm going to keep it and press on. The Vexations of a Shut-In Vampire Princess. Vampire families are in control of this particular kingdom, but one such vampire, Komari, refuses to drink blood, so her actual powers, despite her bloodline, are abysmal, and she has spent the last number of years living her life as a shut-in. However, with a sudden and forceful nudge by the higher-ups, she gets appointed as the commander of an army, so she is now in charge of a ragtag band of delinquents who no one else wants. Fitting. How will she manage to succeed in battle and keep her underlings in line? Simple, by failing upwards. Despite having some action and existing within a fantasy world, this series is at its heart a comedy. It's not like a true action series because they reveal fairly early on that this war everyone is fighting is not a traditional war, because anyone who dies just gets back up again afterwards. It's more like a giant chess game rather than a real war with stakes. Granted, it probably doesn't feel great for the pawns that are constantly dying, but But the series is a comedy of watching the young Komari continually fail, but do so in such a way that she actually ends up doing exactly what she needed to do, which, at least for me, can get a little bit tiring. Perhaps if I cared a little bit more about the characters after the first few episodes, I'd be willing to stick it out for a bit longer, but as it stands, I am not, so I'm tossing it. The Yuzuki family's 4 sons. This one is a nice little drama about a family of 4 brothers. Their parents passed away sometime before the series started, and now the eldest, in his early 20s, is doing his best to manage the house and take care of his younger siblings. They are all surprisingly independent, but there is still plenty about the world that they need to learn. They have friends and school, but mostly the story seems to be about them working on their own interpersonal relationships and the family dynamic that they now find themselves in. This is another series that I almost feel sad that I don't find much interest in. I can see and I can even feel the amount of heart that this story has, right? With the love that the brothers have for one another quite clear to see, even if some of the brothers themselves are oblivious. I'm tossing it myself, but I am quite confident that there will be people out there that will heavily enjoy this series. And if you are unsure, you have my recommendation to, at the very least, check it out. Undead Unluck. A modern series where a number of individuals get mysterious powers all related to the prefix un, like undead and unluck. Our protagonist, Fuko, has the unluck power, where she herself is neither lucky nor unlucky. Anyone who is in physical contact with her, skin-to-skin contact with her to be more precise, gets blasted with insane amounts of bad luck. This is previously manifested a number of years ago with her parents giving her goodbye kisses before going on a plane and then having that plane blow up on the tarmac. Our other protagonist, Andy, has the power Undead. He is not a zombie in the traditional sense, but he's more of like a comedic Wolverine. His head can talk and act even when separated from his body, and he can regenerate his limbs and even jettison his limbs to make him fly Iron Man style or use his body parts as projectiles. And most importantly, he can't die. So even if he makes physical contact with Fuko and her unluck utterly destroys him, he just regenerates back to normal again and everything is fine. The story so far is about these two characters running from an organization of other unpowered individuals who see their powers as a danger to society. Fuko can't run from them on her own, and Andy has apparently lived with his immortality for so long that he just wants to die. So he sees Fuko as his only possible exit from life and wants to receive such bad luck from her that he just can't survive the fallout. It's honestly a really quirky action series worthy of its place in the Shonen Jump lineup and also worthy of a spot on my watch list. I'm curious to see where the story goes, but I'm also, worried again because this is an adaptation that doesn't have an end to it, and I'm worried that this adaptation is going to end in an unsatisfactory way. The manga itself currently has 18 volumes, which means I doubt we're gonna get through all of that, so chances are this adaptation will just pick a spot and end. Hopefully it'll end well, but until then, I'm gonna keep it. Under Ninja. This is one of those shows where after watching the first episode, I was just so bored by it. I honestly ended up looking to Reddit for episode reactions to see whether or not I was losing my mind and to see if anybody had similar thoughts on the show as I did. Turns out that I absolutely am in the minority because despite the series not being talked about all that much online, those on Reddit who did watch it seemed to come away with a positive reaction. But it is an action comedy, so I guess that's all just a matter of taste. The show exists in a modern setting and claims that there are only 200,000 ninjas left currently in Japan. Not only are there ninjas, but there are also ninjas that oppose those ninjas. The protagonist himself is a ninja, I think, but he gets sent to a school where there are some more ninjas that want to fight other ninjas. If this sounds confusing, it's because the show doesn't like to make things very clear. Honestly, there was actually a point where when I was watching the first episode, I fully expected some kind of curtain to be thrown up, and then for them to just be like, yeah, no, the main character has some severe case of Chinibyo or something, which still might happen. But beyond that, I'm getting serious Cromartie High School vibes, which normally would be a positive because that's a comedy series I really loved back in the day. But at least for here, it just seems off, and I'm not really feeling it. So it might be good for others, apparently, but good for them. It's not good for me. I'm out. But that is it for our show today. With any luck, you now have a greater amount of knowledge about what is airing this season and what you yourself will want to watch. So on top of everything else that's already going to be in the description, from sponsor requirements from Surfshark, a link to a place where you can hopefully find all of the streaming information for this season. There will also be a link and a little bit of coupon code for Bookwalker so that you can go and check out any of the original material if you so choose. Now that code only works for your very first time at Bookwalker and a brand new fresh account, but it is 600 yen off for essentially nothing. So I have that there in case you would like to use it, and if you do, well then it is there and useful to you. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't, hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, and until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime. I gave you a whole bunch of them, pick one, and stay frosty.